Okay, so welcome. This month's webinar, if you're new to us, we do monthly webinars each month, and this month we're really focusing on the hemp industry. Last month we did the forestry. Each month we do a different topic, and we will send this out to everyone that is listening, or anyone that registered. You'll get a copy of both the presentation files and of the recording. So we do have right now a poll up, and I'm just going to see kind of where we are. I'll leave it up for the duration. First question, does your state program, does the MigrantEd program in your state sign up families working in hemp? 34% of you say yes, 13% say no, and 53% say you're not sure. Have you seen hemp production increase or decrease in your state? 33% say you've seen an increase, 6% say decrease, and 61% says I'm not sure. And then we have 7 of you that are brand new to one of our webinars, and it looks like everybody else has come before. So we welcome you. We appreciate you joining us, and we hope that this will be helpful. So just as a warning, sometimes when we get evaluations, people will say, oh, it was so much information and you should slow it down. Just to let you know, I'm going to give you a ton of information. We record this. So the idea is we will put the information out there, and then you can go back and listen to it. The presentation files will have the links of anything that I'm referring to, any articles. So just to warn you, I am going to give you a ton of information to not hopefully maximize the time and give you a really good overview of the industry itself. So back when IDRC was IRRC, we were kind of tracking the Farm Bill and when hemp was introduced and given a little bit of history of hemp. And so it's been a long time since we've done a hemp presentation. So I'm going to do a little bit of a mix of kind of how it's, a little bit about how it's, the process of growing, the difference between hemp and marijuana, and a whole bunch of information. But I'm also going to share the current situation and what it's looked like in the last 3 years, how things have changed. So if you're familiar with hemp, you're going to get a little history lesson. If you're not, then you're going to get a whole bunch of information, and I hope it's helpful. So let me start on make sure my slides are working and make sure everything is here. I will try to pay attention to the chat box too. So if you have a question that you want to put out to the group, you guys can always answer each other too. A lot of times, that's a great help too if you see that. So to start it out, first of all, we want to make sure that we're saying that hemp can be qualifying. Marijuana does not qualify. And so if you see the question here, is working with hemp considered qualifying work for the purposes of migrant education program? And this is from the results website. The answer is production or initial processing of hemp crops may be considered qualifying work for the purposes of MEP to the extent that the crops are legal under federal and state law. In the past, there were some states that did not allow hemp production, and so it might have been eligible in one state that allowed it. I believe most states now all allow it. So that has changed since the last time we did a training on this. And it says, please see the non-regulatory guidance, Chapter 2, F4 and 22 for further information on the types of activities that constitute production or initial processing of crops. And so it says it must be consistent with the definition of qualifying work. Such activities must also be part of the individual's temporary or seasonal employment in agriculture. So I want to build the frameworks of everything that I'm sharing on today to really let you know that hemp, as long as your state allows it to be produced in your state, then it can be a qualifying activity for MigrantEd. But I want to say again, medical marijuana does not qualify at all because it's not allowed federally. And so if that happens in your state, then yours is going to be a little bit more complicated because a family may tell you they're working in hemp and you have to make sure it's not marijuana. So you'll have to make sure, learn about that. But we're just going to give the big picture and then also bring it back to things that you should know about the production, how it can be used, things like that. Okay, so here we go. And I realize I only have an hour and I feel like I have too many slides because there's a lot to know. But so I intentionally have a lot of verbiage on the slides. 1, to make sure that I cover all that I need to cover. 2, so that you can go back and refer back to the big picture if you need to on the slides. So in 2014, like it says here, with the passage of the 2014 Farm Bill, Congress did a change towards how they looked at hemp. And they took it off the Controlled Substance Act. And they allowed that a state Department of Agriculture could grow or cultivate industrial hemp as part of a pilot program. So that was back in 2014. And they said, provided that the growth and cultivation is allowed under laws of the state by which the program is located. So they allowed the opening of like that they could do these pilot programs. And there were a few states that jumped right in and started doing that. Kentucky was one, for example. So it then was one of the first times it drew a distinction between hemp and marijuana. So that was what if you've been in Migranette a long time and you're thinking, well, when did this start? You know, why hemp now? It used to not be anything that we would be allowed to work with, but with 2014, with its first change in the Farm Bill, and then there was another change in 2018. So I've highlighted in 2018, it said that they clarified that both hemp and hemp products could be legal. And then it allowed that industrial hemp could be grown more in a state. And so it went from instead of just a policy, a pilot program, to be able that states could build their own industrial hemp programs in their state. And so there's a lot of information. It says below, this newly enacted legislation does not mean that hemp will immediately become a cash crop or that farmers can grow it as freely as they do corn, soybeans, wheat, or tobacco. But before hemp can be grown outside of a pilot program conducted by an institution of a higher ed, the state first had to create a plan on how they would monitor and regulate it. So each state had to create their own. So some of you are very aware of this. You've seen it from the beginning, and your state systems and how it's set up is a little bit different. And so we're going to, again, go broad, but you know that each state was then required to create their own system and how they would regulate this once they decided to move past that pilot program stage. And so that's where it now becomes something that, that we can look at. So one of the big things you want to know is the difference between hemp and marijuana. But it says here, while hemp and marijuana are both part of the cannabis species, each has unique properties that distinguish its use. So hemp can grow as high as 20 feet with leaves bunched near the top of the stem. It contains 0.3% or less of THC, no psychoactive properties, and it can grow in most climates according to what they said originally. We may debunk that in a little bit. And then it says it also requires little care. So marijuana is shorter, it resembles a bush with more leaves and buds surrounding the plant's body, as you can see the two different pictures. Contains 5 to 35% THC, does have those psychoactive side effects, and growth has to be carefully monitored, controlled in an isolated, warm, humid area to really maximize that, the THC that they're hoping. And cross-pollination can ruin the content. So a lot of this will be grown indoors. A lot of times you would not see like hemp across the street from marijuana because of the challenges that they're having with, any sort of cross-pollination. So Leslie has a question of what is hemp used for. You will see I'll explain that in just a little bit. Well, here's the slide. So we're going to talk in a little bit about the history of hemp, but there are tons and tons of uses of hemp. And so it says hemp cultivation requires no chemicals, pesticides, or herbicides. In lots of places in the world, they've used it for a long time. And so the hemp meat can be used, so like part of the seed, the fruit in dairy products and all sorts of things. The shell itself can be turned into flour. This is like the seed shell, and used in bakery products. The oil can be used in personal care products. Some of you may have seen lotions that are made with hemp oil. It can be in cooking oil. It can also be used in fuel and paint. You can also use part of the seeds or what's left over for animal feed. And then in the past, right now they're using it for all sorts of things. So the fiber is extremely useful, and it can be used in fabric, insulation, carpeting, paneling, cordage, pulp, as a recycling additive, in baggage. And then the herds, they call it, they can actually make fiberboard, compost, mortar, paper filler. There's just all of these different things that hemp can be used for. And it says here, hemp seeds contain nutritious polyunsaturated fats, that 80%, the highest amount found within the plant kingdom. So just many, 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 many uses that hemp can be grown for. So you can see, again, here, you're going to have low THC in the hemp. You're going to have high THC in marijuana. And so you can see that it says here, it was one of the first plants that humans ever cultivated. Ancient Chinese pottery bearing impressions from hemp rope suggests that it was used over 5,000 years ago, and possibly even twice as long before that. It can be used for thread, cordage, cloth, paper, food, yes, and intoxication, if it's the marijuana version of the plant. So the cannabis, which is the plant that both hemp, and marijuana come from, it has both male and female plants. When growing marijuana, male plants are removed and only female plants are cultivated. That's because when the flowers are fertilized, it lowers the concentration of THC, which is the main chemical in marijuana that creates the intoxicating effects. And that's what the cannabis flowers produce. So, of course, they're wanting to remove the male plant from that. Commercial marijuana is usually grown indoors so that their conditions can be monitored very closely in order to optimize that growth. And although you can find THC throughout the plant, it's in the flowers or buds that are harvested for recreational marijuana. So some of you are in states that marijuana is totally legal, other ones you're not. And so some of your knowledge on this, I'm sure I'm just backing all the way back to the beginning to make sure everyone kind of sees, how it can be eligible for us. So marijuana is grown to encourage it to grow lots of flowers. And that's because that THC is concentrated in those trichomes, those little glands that they have on the flowers of the plant. Flowers of the female marijuana plant that have not been fertilized by a male plant's pollen will produce more of the resin that contains THC. So totally different process, totally different product that they're trying to come out with. And hemp is very different from that. Hemp, on the other hand, is cultivated as close as you can get as to how it grows naturally. Hemp is grown all over the world for food, fiber, and oil, and the whole plant can be used, not just the flower. So there is very easy wind pollination. So with hemp, male and female plants are sown very closely together, allowing for easy wind pollination. And they like that because it'll crowd out the weeds. So you'll have these very tall, hardy plants that look very different from the shorter, bushier marijuana plants. So another difference is, that it says between hemp and marijuana is that hemp naturally has almost no THC, while most marijuana plants produce just trace levels of CBD. So CBD, a lot of times coming from hemp. And so there's different products that we're getting from each one. So in order for hemp to be considered hemp, its flowers must contain just 0.3 THC, which is 33 times less than the least potent marijuana. Therefore, it's impossible to get high from consuming hemp. And so when they first started growing hemp, that was one of the concerns that people would try to break into the fields. And they're saying, no matter what, it's a totally different crop than what someone might have been thinking that they were growing. So it's sown in tight patches, and it says for starters, farmers sowed their hemp crop in tight passage, creating individual plants that were tall by design. So this article that I'm quoting right here is on the history of hemp. And this man called Bird, he said he boasted that his hemp was twice as long as that which comes from the East Country. So in Virginia, for example, they had a rich history of growing hemp, and they could see the plants, they would observe them that they grew at least 14 feet tall. They're tight clusters, few branches, and therefore lacks the profusion of female flowers. So it looks totally different. Thomas Jefferson noted that hemp is abundantly productive and it will grow forever in the same spot. Many of us know that farmers have to do a lot of crop rotation. They can't grow corn, for example, many, many years in the same place because of all the nutrients that it takes out of the ground. So to find a crop that you could literally keep growing over and over, that doesn't take, that's not depleting the soil. This was something that's one of the really things that they tout of hemp, that you could continue to grow the same place. So there was a lot of, in the past, there was tons of, hemp that was used all over and grown all over the country. This was years and years ago. So just to understand the process of what happens, you start growing, and after, once your plant is, 13, 14 foot high, like the examples that we had before, that it's grown to its full stature, the plants have to be cut or pulled from the ground and tied in large bundles to dry. So hemp is used for a lot of different purposes. And right now, depending on what they're using it, some may be using it for the seed, or some may be using it for the fiber. And so it's going to look a little bit different, but generally it has to be cut, it has to be pulled, and then it has to do what they call ret or rot. And in the past, what they would do, and in some places they still do this, the retting or rotting occurred by immersing the stalks in water and allowing natural moisture in the form of rain or dew to fall upon them, loosening the useful strands from the woody bark in the interior. After another period of drying, laborers would use a hemp rake, a wooden tool that is shaped like the jaws of a crocodile, to crack and separated the unwanted flakes of waste from the long fibers. So this process is going to grow, and then they're going to have to cut it. Then they're going to have to kind of separate out, let it dry, and let it rot. Says breaking was a repetitive, tiring task. For all of his praise of hemp, Bird noted, one difficulty that discomforts me a little, and that is a great labor that it requires breaking it. Jefferson said breaking and beating it, which has always been done by hand, is so slow and so laborious and so much complained by our laborers. This was, they invented their own hemp break in order to make this a little bit easier. And so now they have some mechanized tools that they can actually use. But here's an example of, in the past, how they would push it in and then have this break, kind of push down on it, like I said, with alligator, to kind of break down, the pieces of the stalk of the plant. So make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Just example of in Virginia, in the 18th century, Virginia had cultivated 12,000 acres of hemp. More than 45,000 acres they had in tobacco. So this was something that was all over the place in our country. They later outlawed it. And so it's kind of interesting. Where the challenge is farmers have to make sure that they're, less than that point, that 0.3 or less THC limit. There's a lot of seed available outside of the US, but we don't know how acclimated it is. When they first started back after this pilot program, part of what the challenge was is, can the seed that comes from Canada or can it come that comes from another place grow well in Arizona or grow well in Tennessee? And if you get a lot of seeds from different places, some plants grow better, than other places, and getting the seed from the right place or a similar place can be really helpful. You have a comment? Well, that is what I always do, carry my own hemp break. Yes, you never know when you need that. So it says if farmers, one of the challenges that the farmers that are currently growing hemp, they have to make sure that the seed will, be less than that 0.3 limit at harvest. If it's any what they call hotter than that, it becomes marijuana and the whole crop can be destroyed. And so I was, in preparation for this, I was doing some research and I was listening to a hearing that they had in Congress, and one tribe area had said that they had this whole pilot program, and then they came in and checked their hemp and they said that it was too hot and they took everything. And so their challenge was, they were trying to follow all the rules, make sure they had the right seed. And then in the end, the product that they were growing, when it got tested, it came out with having too much THC. So if farmers bring in seed and the crop busts the 0.3 limit at harvest, it becomes marijuana and it has to be destroyed. And so it says one of their concerns were, according to the experts, saying this will really keep a brake on some of that expansion until they understand really how to get the plant genetics just right to make sure that they're good in different environments. And so in the beginning, they were saying this is really going to be a big limiter. So industrial hemp is normally planted using a grain drill, and both oil and fiber hemp is typically planted in a 6 to 7 inch rows using every run of the drill. Oil seed, as per other seed crops, are directly seeded at the rate of approximately 25 pounds per acre. So you'll want to learn in your own state, what is the hemp used for? Is it used for seed? Is it used for fiber? Is it used for CBD? What exactly is it? Because the process will be a little bit different. So back in 2019, we had this slide where we could see in 2015 how much hemp was being grown all the way up to 2019. And you can kind of see the places in the country that were starting to grow. Colorado has always been one of those leaders. Kentucky also has been. Tennessee has some. North Carolina, and you can kind of see a lot of the areas that did tobacco in the past in the South were natural fits to kind of switch over and try to do hemp. But in 2019, they were really saying hemp is going to be the product that's going to really grow, and we're going to talk about what that looks like today, whether it's has as much hype as they thought that it was going to have, or kind of where it's looking. So it says here, before 2015, hemp was virtually non-existent in the terms of U.S. agriculture because of the Controlled Substances Act, lumped it with all cannabis plants in 1970 as a substance not currently accepted for medical use and a high potential for abuse. 2014 changed that. And so you can kind of see that they continue to, increase this, acres that were planted. The challenge was a lot of people planted it. But here were some of the, this is an article by Forbes in 2019, just of some highlights. They said, poor first year, yields make it difficult for farmers to be profitable. Growing hemp is a lot more labor intensive than other crops. Some of the hemp seed being sold for CBD rich plants is a ripoff. Thieves are stealing hemp plants thinking it's marijuana, too much hemp being produced, and no new markets for farmers to unload it. So this wound up being one of the biggest challenges, is people jumped in thinking that they were going to be able to produce this crop that would then yield huge results. And then a lot of times they grew it without having knowing who was going to buy it in the end. So over and over, this idea of, how you're going to process this. And, it says hemp is a laborious affair, especially since many farmers do not presently have the proper equipment to efficiently see the process through from seed to harvest. Although some hemp croppers say they have been able to use modern machinery to get the job done, others have had to invest thousands of dollars into new equipment. And because depending on the type of seed they got, the hemp grows differently. So, it says plants must be put in the ground as seedlings. A lot of work has to be done by hand. Producing it's dirty work, but someone has to do it. So of course, that's for us. That's good because that means somebody's doing, that sort of work and they might be eligible for the program. So just looking at the plant itself and the process, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks to germinate. The seedling is 2 to 3 weeks. It starts to turn into vegetation after 2 to 8 weeks, flowers in 6 to 8 weeks, and then you can harvest it after that. And so, trying to see that process of, what it looks like. So here are some, big picture again for all the different areas. The stalk can be used in textiles and paper. The leaves can be used in building materials. The flowers, depending on what, if it's what type of cannabis you're looking at, if you're looking at the medical side, at the marijuana side, then of course they have that. But if you're looking at hemp, there's also salad oil, margarine, food supplements, personal hygiene things. The seeds can be used in all sorts of, the feedstock. So you can see the potential that this could be really, really big. But there are some challenges that they're facing right now. So here's which states had the most planted in 2019, with Montana actually being one of the largest states, then to Colorado, Kentucky, North Carolina, Oregon, Minnesota, Oklahoma, North Dakota, New Mexico, and you can kind of see on down. So a lot of states jumped in there. Kind of see that slide. So it says U.S. farmers have been licensed to grow. Let's see, what year was this? I think this was still 2019. U.S. farmers were licensed to grow 511,442 acres of marijuana's non-intoxicating cannabis cousin in 2019. And you could see that was way up. Let me see. There's a comment: as a son of a farmer and as one who works with our farmers here in Mississippi, I imagine the problem in the South is that it's just not culturally accepted as a thing to do. So you can kind of see there is some stigma, but I'm in Tennessee, and I know plenty of local farmers that have switched from some nursery to trying the hemp once they, getting the word out as far as the differences between the two products. So in 2019, there were a lot of changes. So we kind of saw some of the articles. One of the challenges, the states were required to create their own policies. And so the USDA didn't put rules out for a while on all that those things needed to be included. And so they put out some new ag rules in 2019. Hemp farmers were eligible for federal crop insurance. That was another challenge. Like, a farmer may want to grow this, but if it's not going to be backed by crop insurance, and that may be something that they don't want to move forward. They also couldn't get loans for work related to that. The EPA announced reviewing different types of applications that could be used on hemp products. So in 2019, the Federal Credit Union did clarify that they could get credit. Before that, they couldn't. And then the FDA was still looking at the ways that CBD could be used and how hemp could be used in food products and nutritional supplements. It didn't come out and rule that it could be in everything, but they were saying, all right, these are some changes and some things that we're working on. So you can see here that if the FDA hasn't come out clearly and said, yes, you can use this and this and this can be a real challenge for farmers to be marketing their products and, seeing where this is going to go. And an industry really may not grow as much as it can without that. So in addition, the U.S. made crop insurance available for hemp growers for 2020. That insurance provide coverages on the whole farm revenue protection program, and cultivators who are part of a state or university research programs would have access to it. So that was something that the farmers were really asking for. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit, back up a little bit. In 2018, this is where our numbers were, with Montana still really leading, then Colorado, Oregon, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And you can see in 2019, you could still see some of those additional licenses that were given, highest number of licenses. So some states issued tons of licenses, and then they didn't always have the growers go out and actually, produce acreage for those licenses. So sometimes licenses can look like one thing and actual acreage can look like something totally different. So the consumer demand back in 2018, they were saying this is going to just go crazy. And they continued to tell them like CBD is really going to be something that people are, the market is just huge. And so the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, back in 2018, gave an interview and he warned that there could be too much overproduction. And he said farmers in the United States are so productive, they could crash this market before it gets off on the ground. And so they were wondering, like with basic economics, if there's too much of a product and not enough demand, is that going to crash it? And so some of that happened. So you've got, people were starting to get into this. They're realizing it's super labor intensive. And then they're trying to figure out, is this, where am I going to market this product in the first place? So what they said might happen actually did happen. The CBD prices actually went down, this concentration of per pound. So CBD is, what they're able to produce out of that oil they're able to get per pound of hemp biomass. And they could see that it went down into 2019, the price itself. And so this, of course, had an impact. So there's a comment here from a Jane Kolodinsky. I'm not saying if I'm right. She is an economics professor at the University of Vermont. She said hemp farmers, the markets have bottomed out and they don't have buyers for their products. Many farmers who jumped into the industry after the Farm Bill were, after the changes, were inexperienced. And some said, okay, well, hey, let's try this. And many of them didn't have a business plan or didn't know exactly where they were going to go. And in some of these places, there was not a middleman processor that they could even ship it to. So I believe, here's an article that just shows, that it says here, thousands began farming hemp this year. It hasn't gone how they hoped. The rush to farm industrial hemp has left some farmers without a buyer. So in 2019, it started kind of this idea that this was going to be this golden crop was not exactly shaking out how they imagined back in 2014 and 2017. So 65% of US hemp farmers back in 2019 lacked a buyer for their crop. And that gave them few alternatives, where some of them may have just, sold it to a local, they didn't have the chance to sell it to a local grain elevator. They weren't sure where to go with it. Let's see, I think we have a comment. Yes, so there is a comment that because this is a licensed product, and this is from Sarah from Vermont, we're able to get a list of the growers from the Agency of Agriculture. So every state is different. You can do a Freedom of Information request on the IDRC agriculture portal. We've gone through and tried to get most of your hemp lists that could be available. Some of them we can actually get like full information of a hemp farmer. A lot of them we can only get the name. And it just depends on what your state is able to authorize in that. When they design those rules, if you're wondering where to find your hemp farmers, you can of course go to our website and look at your lists. But the comment here, it says, when they got the list, it doesn't tell size or anything, just name, town, and an email or phone number. But it's somewhere to start visiting and determine who's big enough to outsource labor. So yeah, that's a good comment there. So, but again, your farmers, someone may have gotten a license, may not even have gone to production or even now maybe growing. So that's something to just think about. Since people entered in on speculation, the results could be really tragic for some farmers. So the Farm Bill coincided with a boom in the market for food, drink, and cosmetic products laced with CBD. But then, then we had COVID. So at the time, they were promising that it would bring at least $750 per acre profit, well above what they were normally getting for soybeans. And so, $150 per acre compared to $750 is a big difference. Last April, and I believe this was still in 2019, farmers planted a pound of hemp biomass sold for about $40. Now, as farmers harvest and take their crops to market, the same sells for $18 to $25. So it was a real challenge. They went ahead and planted. They didn't know what was going to happen. Then some discovered when theirs had to be tested, because there's a part of the state rules is, every so often they have to be tested. Some of them tested too hot, and then they had to crush them and burn them. And so then farmers lost out on that. And so there's been some talk that they're saying that hemp is going to be more like canola oil. Like, for example, things are going to have to be grown. Canola is grown in huge amounts. They're saying that small farms would have a hard time with, really competing over time with larger operations. So they're wondering if, mom and pop operations are going to go away and bigger operations will come in. So right now we're kind of in flux, and I'll give you an update here in just a second on what it is currently. A lot of farmers are still very optimistic about the chances and what's happening. But like it says here, many of the industry professionals predict that many first-time hemp farmers will leave after one or two difficult years. And we did see that. So CBD craze, it says, though many of the traditional uses of the hemp plant were for textiles, papers, and rope, there are others that were wanting the CBD oils that were coming from that to use it as a supplement. So CBD is FDA approved for an epilepsy treatment, but more commonly used recreationally or like theoretically to treat everything from anxiety to gluten intolerance. And it's already a $1 billion industry, and some have expected that it'll really go forward. The only thing is the FDA has not put its approval on that. And so many people say that that's kind of stifling the real true growth in that. Given the demand, they promised that it would be really easy to grow and that it was naturally resistant to pests, able to tolerate wide variances in climate and soil quality, but not everybody agrees. They said it's been really tricky and that sometimes, just different places that it's grown, crossbreeding, all of that can make it so that that THC limit can be above that 0.3. And then you have farmers having to destroy that. And then they've also had a lot of problems with mold. And if the plant gets any mold at all, it is completely unsellable. So you can see that this can be a real challenge for some farmers. So the crops can totally be burned and just destroyed. Another issue is that it takes a lot of material to have enough CBD. And so, if you're doing this small batch artisanal crop, you may not be getting enough of the, what they're really wanting out to make any money. And so right now, they're really wondering what would happen. So in 2019, there was a sharp decline in CBD prices. And it says in late November, at one of the first public options of the crop, farmers hoping for a competitive market found few buyers and prices below 50 cents. Many went home without their crop being sold. So push ahead to 2021. We know that between that we had the pandemic in the middle of this, and in 2021 they shrunk by 46%. And so they also had CBD starting to be used for Delta 8 and Delta 9 products. And so some of the uses that they hope that hemp would go towards, it says in states where recreational or medical marijuana use is legal, they started to use that CBD oil in combination with some of these other products that have psychoactive effects. And so this market went into a different area than some of them originally hoped it would go, with the fiber and the seed and the animal feed and things like that. So looking now at 2021, 2022 acreage, you can see in 2021, there were 36,925 acres of hemp that were harvested in 2021. Big difference from what they projected. And then you can see on this slide over here, you can see the licenses issued, and you can see the crop, what was grown between 2019, 2020, 2021. You can see this outdoor hemp production really going down. And so you have the acres, actually licensed, licenses issued, acres licensed, and then what was actually planted. And you can see it's going way, way down. So I've got a few articles in here when you get the slides, if you want to read more. This one just came out in March of 2022 that says, from glut to gloom, hemp farmers in Oregon face an uncertain future. So this year they're looking at what it's going to look like now that they're seeing, the acreage is down. And a lot of it is because there's still a lot of uncertainty in the market. They're still wanting better regulations from the FDA. They're wanting clear, not the FDA, the USDA. They're also looking at wanting to have those products approved by the FDA. And like right now, it's the fibers, the seeds themselves is not approved yet for animal feed. And they said, well, if that could be approved, that could really expand it. So there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen. So it says there was a very large boom and bust cycle that took place in the first couple of years of hemp. And that essentially meant that after 2019 and 2020, many farmers had leftover stocks of hemp and they were never able to sell it. So of course, you're not going to just sign up to sell, to grow it again if you don't have a place for it to go. It says the U.S. Hemp industry is headed for its third straight year of contracting production and its smallest harvest since the crop was legalized federally in 2018. So this just came out from Steve Davies of AgriPulse. He said 4 years after the Farm Bill legalized industrial hemp nationwide, crop acreage is falling as the industry struggles to get regulatory clarity and infrastructure for products derived from the plant's grain and fiber. So one thing we're not thinking about sometimes is when we say we have this new crop, if there has to be the middleman processing. So who's going to process the grain? Where can they take, where can they take this so that someone can use the fiber and turn it into other things? And so in some states, they don't have a place that this can go to, or there has to go, several states away. And so when they first started growing, they were growing without knowing where it was going to go. Now they're saying farmers have to be very deliberate. If I'm going to grow for seed, or if I'm going to grow for fiber, where am I going to, who's going to buy it from? Do I have a buyer before I grow, from the beginning? So it says with the smallest, I want to iterate that every state is a little bit different. And there was a really interesting article from Minnesota that I know we might have some people on today that are from Minnesota. And if you get the slides, you can check this out. They have some new state rules that the farmers in Minnesota are really seeing a lot of opportunity for them. And so I want to reiterate that overall, we might be declining, and some states might be increasing. So I want to give you the big picture, but then you want to investigate what's happening in your state. And Google is a great way. You can say Google, hemp farmers in Minnesota, 2022, challenges, and then there will be all sorts of articles that'll come up that you can kind of look at your state and figure out what's going on. So it says here, a tough market created initially by severe oversupply because so much was grown, then exasperated by the numerous ways that COVID-19 affected things. All its macroeconomic impacts has driven many operators from hemp. Some, however, have persisted. And the one area that they're seeing gains is the idea of the use of hemp fiber. And so they're seeing that market is continued to kind of grow, although it's slow. So here are just some examples of just current 2021, 2022 data. You can kind of see there was a 3% change in the planting reports, planted acreage. It was way down. And so you can see this production. Of course, not every single acre is reported, but this is what they're saying. They're able to say that the Department of Agriculture's the Farm Service Agency, USDA, released its first batch of crop data in 2022 for hemp production. So that is now available. And you can see that when they reported that, it was down from the year before. So it says, despite more farmers reporting their hemp plantings this year, overall acreage was down significantly from 2021. Furthermore, when data collected by hemp benchmarks directly from state agricultural officials in 2021 is combined with what the USDA has, you can see that there's actually been a 50% decline in production between 2021 and 2022. And so over here, I have two other articles just mentioning, like, some of the hemp farmers in states where recreational marijuana or medical marijuana is allowed to be grown have said, hey, could we be given preference to be able to grow this if this is a new crop in your state? And so some hemp farmers are moving over to recreational marijuana or to medical marijuana because they feel like they already have the knowledge from growing hemp and they can apply that. And then there's another one from Hawaii that was from May. It says hemp farmers are fed up with government regulations hampering the industry's potential. And so there's a lot of concern of, there's too much uncertainty and the markets aren't fully supported at this point, that they're not sure where this is going to go. It says fiber was the only type of hemp that was able to see gains in 2022, with more farmers planting more acreage and significantly larger plots on average, while reports from market participants and regulators continue to tell the need for more processing infrastructure. So more of those middlemen that are taking that, and using that, they're saying that that's something the government should support, those middlemen processors. It says the increase in U.S. fiber hemp production indicates that existing and new processors have been able to establish themselves, expand capacity, and offer new contracts to growers. So a lot of those fiber companies are trying to have those direct contracts with the growers so that they know, hey, this is how many acres I need from you and from you. And so the market is still there, but it's very much in flux and they're not exactly sure where it's going to go. So you can look at the fiber plantings here. You've got reports. Fiber planted acres was almost double, so it's 73% change there. Average plot size went from 26 acres to 39. Max plot size was 537 before, and now some of our larger ones are 686 acres. So you can see that this, there is some change here. There's a comment. It says here in Washington, I've seen farmers that process hops are now processing hemp similar to hops. I've not seen the exact process, but know they process them similarly. picking, kilns, baling, and pelleting, depending on who their clients are. So that's a perfect example. There are other industries that are similar in the drying process or the kilns that they need. And so hops, you know, that you could see that that's a similar process in how those plants are grown, and not really grown exactly the same, but that's a very good comment to see. Sometimes there may be other industries that will well align with hemp, but it's going to look very different in each state. Change my slide. It says reported plantings for hemp grain have also seen significant contraction in 2022, with the total planted acreage and average plot size both almost halved from the year before, even though a few more growers reported planting the crop. So you can see, you know, that this idea of some originally thought they would grow for the grain itself, and that could be used in different products. So there's such potential, but that infrastructure really has to be built. Just because the Farm Bill says, hey, now you can do, you know, pilot programs. Some of the states that did pilot programs also looked at where it would be processed and how it would be used. Other ones focused more on, would the seed be viable here in our state? And depending on what they originally looked at, some may have built something where, you know, the infrastructure is still very much being grown, and that's going to hinder, or it's going to really improve the farmer's chances of being successful. So you can see the U.S. grain and seed hemp plantings. It's gone down, and it's gone down. You know, the average plot size was 52 acres. Now it's down to 31. So you can see even within the same, you know, plant, there's going to be different acreage and different reasons why things are going up or down. Now, there is some hope for the industry that's coming up. There is a new farm bill that's supposed to, that they're looking at right now. And this is over here on the side, we have a picture from New Mexico, for example. You can click on that and learn about their dialogues. This is something good for us to remember too. There are farm bill discussions happening all over the country. And for example, in this one, it says it's sponsored by the New Mexico Food and Agriculture Policy Council. Something that we might want to do as states is reach out and see who is having these discussions in our states, because there's going to be growers, there's going to be producers, there's going to be big ag, you know, people that are going to be at these discussions. And it might be a way that we can also meet with them and understand kind of some of their concerns, but also introduce, maybe be sitting at the table next to somebody who might potentially have a farm, or someone else, you know, some other part that's not hemp maybe, but other crops that we could partner with. So here it says, while markets for hemp products such as fiber, grain, and flour are developing, they are still volatile and uncertain. And it says to support farmers and producers in the ongoing development of this emerging sector, it's crucial that USDA continue to work to support and expand hemp production and hemp industry. So they're looking right now, you know, there is, I think I have a link to a video, to a hearing that they just had just recently of a bunch of different people that came forward and talked to them specifically about their concerns and where the hindrances were to really for the development of the industry. I think the link is right here at the bottom of this page. They had in this particular video that you can watch, they looked at ideas that were needed for the stabilization of the hemp industry. And so one was they wanted specifically to be able to look at the use of grains, of the hemp grain in aquaculture and in livestock, and also look at how digestible of a protein it was, and to be able to see how that could be used. They wanted to continue to look for new markets and be able to show that it would be a safe feeding ingredient. They wanted clear guidance from the USDA about the markets and the requirements. And they wanted a lot of updates in the Farm Bill to really address those things. So really interesting things to kind of think about, to say, all right, who are having those Farm Bill discussions in your state? Not just about hemp, but about the farm needs in general. And you may find that, you know, Farm Bureau of Tennessee is holding those meetings and they are taking those comments. And so it's a discussion that we should be aware of, and also a way that we can meet possible potential partners. So also there was just came out, actually this was not really just came out this year. This was, it was Congresswoman Sheely Pingree, sorry. She introduced the Hemp Advancement Act of 2022 to improve the 2018 Farm Bill's hemp provisions and provide greater clarity and flexibility to hemp growers and processors. So they have, you know, looked at the idea of this Hemp Advancement Act in 2022 of what it would do. They've, in her comments, she kind of says, look, we've seen the hurdles that we're facing, and there's been some unintended consequences of just some things that have been set out in the regulatory guidance. And so they had some suggestions for this idea of this Advancement Act in 2022 that would raise the allowable THC threshold for hemp and in-process hemp extract to make the rules more workable for growers and processors while ensuring that the final products sold to consumers weren't intoxicating, to remove the requirement that hemp testing occur in DEA registered laboratories, which is particularly a challenge in Maine, the state that she's from, where there weren't any of those facilities available, and then end the 10-year ban on people with drug-related felony convictions receiving a hemp license. So right now you can't grow hemp if you had a drug-related felony, in the past 10 years. And so it says, which disproportionately excludes communities of colors from participating in this emerging market. So I've told you a whole bunch of things about hemp that I hope gives you the big picture. It's a very labor-intensive crop. It's something that's being grown in a lot of different states. Takeaways are that right now it's very much in flux. And so some of the states that, like Colorado, for example, that has a history of also with medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, some of the growers will be able to pivot and grow other things. And in other states, this is a totally new, like the one comment, maybe in the deep South, this is something that they're not even ready to address yet or even use. So each one of us are going to see very different situations with hemp in our state. So it's important to know, to be able to find those. Let me see if I can go to our website. I want to share where you can find your list if we have it on the front of the IDRC website. I know we've probably shared this a bunch. I hope most of you know about this. In a lot of the states, we've gone through and tried to do the Freedom of Information request. If there was, I'm just going to open one and see if it's on here. There's a hemp list. And so, for example, here's one for Colorado that you can open, and Colorado provides the active registrants. And so we tried to go through and find a lot of that for you. So you can check those out, but you can always request that Freedom of Information. It's something that usually has to be requested each year. So you can go and figure out, remembering that some of these growers may have registered, but may not actually have land that they're actually, doing acreage right now. So it's important to know, specifically with that. So it's one of those things that we all should be working with. We all should be looking at the challenges that we'll face. If you have both industries, both marijuana and hemp, you're going to have to make sure that when you're talking to families, that you're able to distinguish between the two of them and only sign up the ones that would be eligible. And so every state will have to kind of look at this and see how they can work with it. The industry, there's some really good, let me see if I can share this again. Googling hemp news today, kind of, there's a lot of really good, like hemp today. There's a lot of them that you can specifically look at the current things that are happening nationally. No, I don't want all this stuff. That you can just Google and read about what's happening. Like if I'm trying to find out hemp in Mississippi, I'm just going to Google it. If I can spell it Mississippi, right? I'm going to see what's going on right there. So it'll have, right there, it'll be some sort of information that I can find right away about my state. So there was a question, where are we with this bill? Right now, it was just introduced. I don't think it's moved anywhere yet. So you can always Google that and try to keep up with what's going on. Here's another one that's called MJ Biz Daily that I believe that you can look all over. Let me drop this in here. It has both hemp and CBD information, and you can look at your state. I think they have it by regions, I believe. Yeah. So this one particularly will let you look, all the US or specific things, and they have a lot of information about hemp. So, Google is your friend. You can find a lot of information that way. And I just really encourage you to figure out what's happening in your particular state related to this. So a lot is happening, but definitely it's an area that we should be looking at. So I'm going to stop recording right now.